The car moved through midtown Manhattan like a slow black river, inching between yellow cabs and delivery trucks that seemed permanently stuck in their own particular version of hell. REBA MCENTIRE sat in the back seat of the SUV, her red hair freshly styled, a glass of sparkling water balanced on her knee, watching the city outside the tinted window with the calm curiosity of someone who had seen enough of the world to stop being intimidated by any single piece of it. "We're about 12 minutes out," said her assistant, Donna Hartwell, a sharp woman in her mid-30s with the kind of organizational mind that could schedule a military operation and still remember to order the right kind of salad dressing. She was scrolling through her phone with practiced efficiency, her reading glasses perched at the very tip of her nose. "The gala starts at 7. Cocktail hour runs until 8:30. Dinner is seated at 9. You're at table 4, center floor, next to the Whitmore Foundation board members." "Who else is at the table?" Reba asked without turning from the window. Donna scrolled down. "Senator Patricia Holt and her husband, Derek Callahan from the Grammy board, a couple of major donors I don't recognize. And," she paused, in the way people pause when they're not sure how to say the next thing, "Giovanni Caruso." Reba turned from the window. "The tenor. The very one." Reba picked up her sparkling water and took a slow sip, saying nothing for a moment. Outside, a man on a bicycle wove between two buses with the confidence of someone who had made peace with mortality. "Has he been told I'll be there?" "The seating arrangements were finalized 3 days ago," Donna said. "So, presumably, yes." Reba set the glass back down. "Well," she said simply, and turned back to the window. She had met Giovanni Caruso exactly once before at a Kennedy Center event 4 years earlier. The encounter had lasted approximately 11 minutes and had left the kind of residue that certain conversations leave. Not hostile, not warm, but pointed. He had been polite in the way that some people are polite when they consider politeness itself a form of condescension. He had asked her, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, whether she found it difficult performing in such large arenas, given that country music's intimacy, as he called it, was perhaps better suited to smaller spaces. She had smiled back and said she managed just fine. He had nodded as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. She had not thought about him since, or so she told herself. The Whitmore Gala for Arts Education was held every year at the Grand Meridian Hotel on West 54th Street, a building that had been renovated so many times over the decades that its original architecture existed only in photographs and the fading memory of its oldest staff members. What remained was a kind of curated grandeur, marble floors, chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes, and a ballroom that could hold 600 people in formal attire without anyone feeling particularly crowded. The Whitmore Foundation raised money for arts education programs in underfunded public schools across the country. It was a genuinely good cause, which was part of why the evening attracted the particular mix of people it did. Those who came because they cared. Those who came because it looked good to care. And those who came because the food was exceptional and the open bar ran until midnight. These three categories were not always mutually exclusive. Reba arrived at 7:14, which was late enough to avoid the worst of the press line, but early enough not to be conspicuous. She moved through the cocktail reception with the practiced ease of someone who had been navigating these rooms for decades. A word here, a smile there, a firm handshake with a senator's aide, whose name she made a genuine effort to remember. It was during the second round of cocktails that she first spotted him. Giovanni Caruso was standing near the far end of the room, beside a tall window that looked out onto the lit street below, holding a glass of red wine and speaking to two men in dark suits. He was 61 years old, though he carried it the way some men do, not by pretending it wasn't there, but by wearing it with a certain deliberate authority, as if age were a credential rather than a concession. His hair was silver, his frame still broad and straight, and his voice, even at the low register of casual conversation, carried a resonance that made nearby people unconsciously tilt their heads, as if trying to hear music in traffic. He saw her from across the room. He raised his glass slightly, a gesture that managed to be simultaneously a greeting, an acknowledgement, and a challenge, and smiled. She smiled back. Donna appeared at her elbow. "Table's been called. Dinner's moving up. Apparently the foundation director wants to start the program before 9. Of course he does," Reba said pleasantly, and let herself be guided toward the ballroom. Dinner at table 4 was the kind of meal that tasted better the less you thought about its cost. The foundation had brought in a chef from a restaurant in the West Village, whose waiting list reportedly stretched into the following calendar year. And the results were evident in the way the room grew slightly quieter when the first course arrived, replaced by the small, reverent sounds of people encountering food that demanded attention. Senator Patricia Holt was a compact woman in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair and the alert, slightly compressed energy of someone who had spent 30 years being underestimated and had learned to use it strategically. She was good company, direct, genuinely funny in a dry way that didn't announce itself, and interested in Reba in the specific manner of someone who was asking real questions rather than performing curiosity. "I saw you at the Tulsa benefit," Holt said somewhere between the first and second course. 3 years ago, you sang Fancy. I cried, which I will deny if asked." Reba laughed. "Tulsa was a good night." "It was a great night," Holt said simply, and turned back to her plate. Derek Callahan, the Grammy Board representative, was less interesting, earnest and well-meaning. A man whose enthusiasm for music existed primarily in the abstract, as a category of cultural good, rather than in any particular song or artist that had actually moved him. He used the word landscape to describe the music industry 4 times before the main course arrived. Giovanni Caruso arrived at the table 6 minutes into the first course, slightly delayed, accompanied by a brief apology and a small commotion of rearranged chairs. He settled across from Reba, 2 seats to her left, close enough for easy conversation, far enough for comfortable distance. "Miss McEntire," he said, as if naming something he'd expected to find there. "Mr. Caruso," she replied in the same register. There was a small beat, and then the conversation at the table resumed around them, the way conversations do when they've been briefly interrupted by something they've decided to collectively ignore. It was during the main course that the comment happened. The table had been discussing the foundation's work, the programs, the schools, the specific challenge of keeping arts education alive in districts where budget cuts arrived like seasonal weather. Giovanni had been speaking about the importance of classical training, the way early exposure to opera and orchestral music built a kind of structural understanding of music that other forms, however valid, did not provide on their own. "The architecture of classical music," he was saying, with the fluency of someone who had given this speech many times, "is something that very few musicians outside the tradition ever fully access. It's not a question of talent. It's exposure, training, and a certain willingness to be humble before something larger than yourself." "That's an interesting way to put it," Reba said. He looked at her with that smile, the one she remembered from 4 years ago. "You disagree?" "I didn't say that. Your tone suggested it." "My tone was just curious," she said evenly. The table had gone slightly quiet in the way that dinner tables do when 2 people are having a conversation that is actually about something else entirely. Giovanni leaned back in his chair slightly, swirling his wine. "I always thought it would be fascinating," he said, in a tone that was perfectly calibrated between genuine and playful, "to hear a country artist attempt an aria, not as a criticism, as an experiment." There's something in the storytelling tradition of country music that, in theory, could translate. He paused. In theory. Senator Holt set down her fork with the quiet precision of someone choosing not to respond. There's a piano on that stage, Giovanni continued, nodding toward the stage at the far end of the ballroom, where the evening's program would eventually unfold. And I'm told there's a full sound system. If you ever wanted to try, he smiled again, wider now, I would be happy to guide you through something simple, something short, a moment from La Traviata, perhaps. Nothing too demanding. There was a small silence. Derek Callahan laughed, a short, startled sound, as if he wasn't sure whether this was funny or not. Reba looked at Giovanni Caruso for a long moment, with an expression that was completely unreadable. Then she picked up her wine glass, took a considered sip, and set it back down. All right, she said. Giovanni blinked. I'm sorry. I said all right. She set her napkin beside her plate. Let's do it. The silence that followed was the kind that has a texture to it, dense and slightly airless, the kind that fills a space the way water fills a closed container, pressing outward from all sides. Giovanni Caruso had, in 40 years of performing on stages in Milan, Vienna, London, Buenos Aires and New York, been surprised on stage exactly twice. He prided himself on this. He was a man of enormous professional control, of calibrated instincts sharpened by decades of discipline. He had offered the comment about the aria the way a chess player sometimes makes a move they are certain cannot be answered, casually, with the confidence of someone who knows the board. He had not expected this particular move in response. He started, and then recovered with the smoothness of long practice. I was speaking somewhat hypothetically. And I'm speaking concretely, Reba said pleasantly. You said there's a piano on the stage. There is, but the program hasn't. Then we'd need to talk to whoever's running the program. She looked across the table. Derek, who's coordinating the evening's entertainment? Derek Callahan, who had the expression of a man watching a controlled burn he was not authorized to extinguish, said, That would be Carol Prescott, the Foundation's events director. I think she's at the next table. Reba stood up. Carol Prescott was 54 years old, had organized 47 galas for the Whitmore Foundation over the course of 18 years, and had, in that time, encountered almost every possible form of last-minute request, crisis, and deviation from the planned program. She had dealt with a keynote speaker who arrived intoxicated. She had managed an incident involving a senator, a dessert cart, and a minor structural failure she had never fully explained to the board. She considered herself unflappable. She was therefore unprepared for REBA MCENTIRE appearing beside her table with the specific calm energy of someone who was going to do something whether it was on the schedule or not, and asking with complete courtesy whether there was any possibility of adding an unplanned musical moment to the program. It would be brief, Reba said. 10 minutes, maybe less. Mr. Caruso would be involved. Carol looked across the room to where Giovanni Caruso was still seated at table 4, speaking in low tones to Senator Holt with the careful manner of a man engaged in damage control. Then she looked back at Reba. The program is already set, she said. I know. I'm asking if it can be adjusted. Mr. Caruso agreed to this? Mr. Caruso suggested it, Reba said, which was technically accurate. Carol was quiet for 3 seconds, which in event coordination time was a very long period of contemplation. She looked around the room. The 600 guests, the cameras from 2 entertainment news outlets, the social media presence of roughly 24 verified accounts currently documenting the evening in real time. We have a 15-minute buffer built into the program before the keynote, she said slowly. That was meant to be a string quartet. The string quartet can still play, Reba said. We'd go after. Carol looked at her for another moment. Then she said, Let me make a call. James Whitmore III, the Foundation's director, was 67 years old, had attended approximately 900 galas in his lifetime, and had not been genuinely surprised by anything since 2009. He took Carol's call in the hallway outside the ballroom, listened for 45 seconds without interrupting, and then said, "Reba McEntire wants to sing opera with Giovanni Caruso." "That appears to be the situation," Carol confirmed. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Through the closed ballroom doors, the muffled sound of 600 people eating and speaking and existing in their formal attire pressed against the silence. "Is Caruso going to do it?" "I haven't confirmed with him yet. I wanted your authorization first." Another pause. "Carol," Whitmore said, "if Reba McEntire wants to sing at my gala, she sings at my gala." He paused. "Get Caruso on board, whatever it takes." What it took, as it turned out, was a conversation. Donna had pulled Giovanni aside, discreetly, professionally, in the manner of someone accustomed to navigating delicate situations between large egos, and they had spoken for approximately 4 minutes near the bar. Reba watched from across the room, reading the body language. Giovanni's initial resistance, the subtle shift of his posture as something Donna said registered, the moment where resistance became calculation, and calculation became something that looked almost like curiosity. He looked across the room at her. She looked back. He said something to Donna, who nodded and pulled out her phone. 10 minutes later, it was confirmed. They were on the program, after the string quartet, before the keynote, 12 minutes, maximum. Giovanni appeared at her side. "You understand," he said in a low voice meant only for her, "that this was not how I intended the evening to proceed." "No," she agreed, "but here we are." He studied her for a moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not hostile, not warm, but recalibrated. As if he were reassessing something he thought he'd already understood. "Do you know Libiamo nei lieti calici?" he asked. "The drinking song from La Traviata? Act 1. I know it. Have you sung it?" "Not on a stage." He absorbed this. The soprano line isn't technically demanding. The challenges are breath control and phrasing. The Italian is, "I've sung in 3 languages on stage," she said pleasantly. "I'll manage the Italian." He looked at her again. Then for the first time, his smile was something different, less curated, less polished, arriving from somewhere underneath the surface of his professional face. It lasted only a moment. "Very well," he said. "Then we have approximately 40 minutes to prepare." They found a small rehearsal room on the 2nd floor of the hotel, a narrow space with a battered upright piano, a mirror on one wall, and acoustic tiles that had seen better decades. A pianist named Roy Tanner, who had been scheduled to accompany the string quartet's warm-up, was redirected to their service. He was 28, had a music degree from Juilliard, and spent the first 4 minutes of the session trying not to visibly process the fact that he was playing piano for Reba McEntire and Giovanni Caruso in a hotel rehearsal room with 40 minutes notice. Then Roy Tanner sat down at the piano and played the opening bars of Libiamo, and the room changed. Music does that. It reorganizes the atmosphere of a space in ways that are difficult to quantify and impossible to deny. The narrow room with its worn carpet and its aging acoustic tiles became, for the duration of those first 8 bars, something else entirely. Giovanni sang the opening tenor line with perhaps 40% of his full voice, a warm-up register, calibrated, controlled, the vocal equivalent of a thoroughbred walking before a race. But even at 40%, the sound was something. It filled the room in a way that the room seemed structurally unprepared for, pressing against the ceiling tiles, finding corners, resonating in the piano's open case. Then he nodded to Reba. She took a breath, found the pitch, and sang the soprano response. Roy Tanner's hands slowed almost imperceptibly on the keys. Giovanni Caruso, mid-exhale, went still. Reba McEntire's voice was not a classical soprano instrument. It had never been trained for opera, had never been intended for it, had spent 40 years shaped by an entirely different tradition, by barns and heartbreak and red dirt roads and the particular American ache that runs through country music like a current beneath the surface. But it was a voice of extraordinary natural architecture. The breath control was there, the pitch was there. The phrasing, that elusive quality that separates singers who technically execute notes from singers who mean every single one, was absolutely, unmistakably there. She finished the response line and looked at him. "Again," he said quietly, "from the top." They ran through it 4 times. By the 3rd time, Giovanni had stopped offering corrections. By the 4th time, he was no longer thinking about corrections at all. Something was happening in that room that neither of them had planned for, and both of them recognized it with the specific, slightly unnerving clarity of experienced artists confronting something that exceeds their expectations. The 2 voices fit together. Not in the way that a technically correct pairing fits together, properly matched, professionally executed, competent. They fit together the way certain combinations do when something underneath the technique resonates, when 2 entirely different musical traditions find an unexpected point of contact and discover that at that point they are speaking the same language. Giovanni had sung Libiamo with sopranos from the Vienna State Opera, the Royal Opera House, the Metropolitan. He had sung it with voices of almost clinical perfection, technically magnificent, emotionally appropriate, impeccably trained. He had not, in 40 years, sung it with a voice that sounded like this. "Your breath support," he said, when they finished the 4th run. He was not quite looking at her directly. "It's unusual for someone without classical training. I've been breathing on stage for 40 years, she said. "Yes," he said, "I can hear that." Roy Tanner at the piano said nothing. He was staring at the sheet music with the studied concentration of someone pretending not to have just witnessed something. Donna knocked on the rehearsal room door at 8:50. "They're ready for you. String quartet is finishing up." Reba looked at herself briefly in the mirror on the wall, checking nothing in particular, confirming only that she was still herself, still present, still the same person who had walked into this building an hour and a half ago. She straightened her jacket. Behind her, in the mirror's reflection, she could see Giovanni adjusting his cuffs. He caught her eye in the mirror for a brief moment. Neither of them said anything. They walked out into the corridor together, and the sound of the ballroom, 600 people, the last notes of the string quartet, the low conversational murmur of a room not quite ready to be quiet, came up through the floor beneath their feet. The Grand Meridian Ballroom had a particular acoustic quality that the hotel's event management team described in their promotional materials as warm and resonant, which was the professional way of saying that sound behaved unexpectedly in the space. The ceiling was high, 18 feet at its peak, and the combination of marble floors, heavy draping, and the specific geometry of the room created an environment where music didn't simply fill the space, but inhabited it, spreading horizontally along the walls and vertically toward the ornate ceiling with a kind of slow, purposeful expansion. The string quartet had just finished. The room was applauding with the polite warmth appropriate to a good performance that no one had specifically come to see. At table 4, Senator Holt had leaned over to whisper something to her husband. At the press table near the east wall, a journalist named Kevin Marsh, from a major entertainment outlet, had his phone in his hand, preparing to file a brief update about the gala before the keynote began. At the bar, Frank DeLuca, one of the foundation's largest donors, a 60-year-old real estate developer from Connecticut who had attended 17 of these galas and found them uniformly pleasant and uniformly forgettable, was ordering his 3rd whiskey and checking his watch. James Whitmore III took the stage to a comfortable swell of applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, with the practiced warmth of a man who had opened 1,000 events, "before we move into our keynote address, we have an extraordinary and completely unplanned addition to our evening's program." He paused, letting the word "unplanned" do its work in the room. A murmur moved through the crowd like a small wave. "It is my great pleasure to welcome to this stage two of the most remarkable musical artists in the world today. Ladies and gentlemen, REBA MCENTIRE and Giovanni Caruso." The room's reaction was divided and immediate. Those who knew both names reacted with visible surprise. Those who knew only one of the names reacted with polite curiosity. Those at table 4, who had been present for the preceding hour, reacted with the contained intensity of people watching a chess game, whose opening moves they had witnessed personally. Kevin Marsh, at the press table, stopped filing his update and turned his full attention to the stage. They walked on from opposite sides. This was not planned. It simply happened. REBA from the left wing, Giovanni from the right, both arriving at the center of the stage at approximately the same moment, which created an effect that was visually and dramatically almost too perfect. They acknowledged each other with a brief nod. Roy Tanner was already seated at the grand piano, not the hotel upright from rehearsal, but a 9-foot Steinway that had been positioned at the edge of the stage for the evening. He looked up at them once, adjusted his sheet music, and placed his hands over the keys. Giovanni took the microphone first. "Good evening," he said. In the room's warm acoustic, his speaking voice already drew a small, involuntary reaction from the crowd. A slight forward lean, a collective realignment of attention. "What you are about to hear is an experiment. It was suggested approximately 90 minutes ago in the spirit of—" He paused, and something moved across his face, good-natured curiosity. He glanced briefly at REBA. "We have rehearsed this piece 4 times. Once was for confirmation that the idea was not insane. 3 more were because—" Another pause, shorter. "We found it worth continuing." He stepped back from the microphone. REBA stepped forward. "Libiamo ne lieti calici," she said, in an accent that was not quite native Italian and not quite country Oklahoma, but something in between. Something that was entirely her own. "It means, roughly, let's drink from the joyful chalices. It's a drinking song." She smiled, and the room laughed, a genuine warm sound. "And if any of you need another drink before we start, now's the time." The laughter grew, and in the warmth of it, the room settled. The slight tension of the unexpected became something else. Anticipation, openness, the particular receptivity of a crowd that has decided to be surprised. Roy Tanner played the introduction. Giovanni came in first, as written, his tenor voice rising into the ballroom with the full authority he had withheld in the rehearsal room. This was his public voice, the voice that had filled the Metropolitan Opera House, the voice that had performed in 3 languages before heads of state, the voice that existed at the absolute pinnacle of its form and knew it. The first phrase unfurled across the room like something physical, like weather, and the crowd received it with the small, involuntary sounds that great live music always provokes. A collective exhale, a shift in posture, the unconscious acknowledgement that something real is happening. Then REBA answered him. The room's sound changed. It changed the way a room changes when a window is opened, not catastrophically, not with drama, but with the sudden presence of something from outside, something different in temperature and texture and origin. Her voice was not his voice. It was not attempting to be his voice. It arrived from a completely different place, carried a completely different weight, and spoke in a completely different accent. Not linguistically, but musically, in the way that voices carry their entire history in their tone. And it was magnificent. Kevin Marsh, at the press table, set down his phone entirely. His hands were flat on the table. He was not taking notes. He was simply listening, which was something he had not done at an event in longer than he could accurately remember. Frank DeLuca at the bar turned around. His whiskey was in his hand, but he had stopped drinking it. He would remain in that position, motionless, for the next 9 minutes. Senator Holt at table 4 had her hand over her mouth. They sang to each other. This was the part that no amount of rehearsal could have produced, because it emerged not from preparation, but from the specific, unrepeatable chemistry of two real people actually listening to each other in a live room with 600 witnesses. Giovanni had sung this piece with many partners, and he had always sung it well, and his partners had always sung it well, and the result had always been excellent and technically accomplished and occasionally moving. This was different. He was genuinely listening to her. She could hear it in the way he adjusted, slightly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamics of his phrasing when she responded, the way a great conversationalist adjusts their register when the person across from them says something unexpected and interesting. He was not performing alongside her. He was performing with her, and she was doing the same. There was a moment, near the piece's midpoint, when they both reached the same phrase simultaneously. The melody's highest point held for 3 beats over Roy Tanner's arpeggiated piano accompaniment. And their voices, so entirely different in origin and character, converged into a single sound that was neither classical nor country, but something that belonged to both and exceeded either, something that the ballroom received in absolute silence. Not the polite silence of a crowd being respectful, the involuntary silence of 600 people who have stopped thinking and are simply feeling. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5. The phrase resolved. Roy Tanner brought the accompaniment down. The voices separated back into their individual threads, wound through the final bars, and came to rest. The last note decayed into the room. For 2 full seconds, there was no sound at all. Then the applause arrived. It was not the polite, graduated applause that typically concludes a performance at a charity gala. It came all at once, from every part of the room simultaneously, as if 600 people had made the same decision at the same moment, without consulting each other. Several people were standing before. They were fully aware they had risen. Senator Holt was on her feet, which was something her press secretary, seated one table over, noted with the specific professional awareness that the senator did not stand at events. James Whitmore III, in the wings, had his hand over his heart. Frank DeLuca at the bar discovered that his eyes were wet. He was a man who had not cried at anything since his father's funeral 11 years ago. He set down his whiskey with great care, as if afraid of disturbing something fragile in the air around him. On stage, REBA and Giovanni stood side by side in the last of the applause. They were not touching, not posing, not performing the aftermath of the performance. They were simply standing there, in the sound of 600 people, expressing something that went beyond appreciation into something closer to gratitude. Giovanni Caruso looked at REBA MCENTIRE. He was a man who chose his words with the same precision he brought to his music, which meant he was a man of relatively few words in moments that mattered. He looked at her with an expression that had nothing left of condescension in it. No architecture of hierarchy, no careful social calibration. What was there instead was simpler and more difficult, genuine surprise, and in the surprise, the beginning of something that might eventually become respect. That, he said quietly, just below the continuing applause, was not what I expected. REBA looked at him with the small, particular smile of someone who has spent 40 years exceeding expectations without making a performance of it. It never is, she said. Kevin Marsh filed his story from the hallway outside the ballroom at 9:47 p.m. He had been a music journalist for 19 years. He had covered the Grammys, the Oscars, the Met Gala, 3 presidential inaugurations with musical components, and more charity galas than he could count. He wrote his stories with professional efficiency and moderate enthusiasm, and a commitment to accuracy that he considered his primary professional virtue. He spent 47 minutes on this story. The headline he wrote and then rewrote 4 times before settling was, "Reba McEntire and Giovanni Caruso delivered the most unexpected musical moment of the year, and nobody saw it coming." He had 6 minutes of video on his phone, shaky, imperfect, shot from a seated position at the press table. The audio was distorted in the high frequencies by the room's acoustics. He posted it before he finished the article. By the time the article went live at 10:15, the video had been viewed 43,000 times. By midnight, it was at 280,000. By the time Reba McEntire's car pulled up in front of her hotel on the Upper West Side at 11:50 p.m., her phone had received notification of a trending hashtag, 4 missed calls from her manager in Nashville, and a text from a phone number she didn't recognize that turned out to be a Grammy producer she had met once at a ceremony 5 years ago. She sat in the back of the car for a moment, the phone in her hand, the city outside the window doing what cities do. Moving, glittering, entirely indifferent to the particular weight of individual moments. "Good night?" Donna asked from the front seat. Reba looked at her phone for another moment. Then she set it face down on the seat beside her. "It was something," she said. Across town, in a suite at the Whitmore's partnered hotel in Midtown, Giovanni Caruso sat in an armchair by the window with a glass of red wine and his own phone. He was not checking social media. He had not maintained a personal social media account in 6 years and had no intention of reversing this decision. But his manager, Robert Ashfield, had been calling him with the relentless patience of someone who knows their call will eventually be answered, and Giovanni had finally picked up. "It's everywhere," Robert said. There was a quality to his voice that Giovanni recognized from previous moments of unexpected professional development, a compressed, effortful calm, the sound of a man containing his excitement through sheer force of professional habit. The video from that journalist, Marsh from the outlet, it's been picked up by 6 major news aggregators. The comments are... A pause in which the sound of rapid scrolling was audible, unprecedented in terms of positive response. "I know what unprecedented means, Robert." "Giovanni," a breath. "They're calling it historic." Giovanni looked out the window at the geometric grid of Midtown lights. "That seems premature. The Met is already talking about reaching out. There are 3 major labels that want..." "It was 12 minutes, Giovanni said. "In a hotel ballroom." "Yes," Robert said, "and in those 12 minutes you sang a Verdi duet with Reba McEntire and produced something that 600 people in that room are currently describing as the best live music they've ever heard. That's what 12 minutes can do." Giovanni was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to do with this information?" he said finally. "I want you," Robert said with great care, "to not do anything for the next 24 hours. Don't call anyone. Don't make any decisions. Just let me handle the incoming, and then we'll talk tomorrow when we have a clearer picture." "Fine," Giovanni said. "Fine," Robert agreed. Giovanni ended the call and sat for a long time in the armchair, the city outside the window, the wine untouched in his hand. He was thinking about a voice. Carol Prescott arrived at the Whitmore Foundation offices at 7:15 on Thursday morning to find 47 unread emails, a voicemail inbox at capacity, and her assistant Michelle Okafor already at her desk with the specific expression of someone who has been managing an escalating situation since before business hours. "How bad?" Carol asked, setting her coffee down. "It's not bad," Michelle said carefully. "It's the opposite of bad, which is its own kind of complicated." Carol sat down. She opened her email. The first 12 were from press outlets requesting official statements about the previous evening's unplanned performance. The next 8 were from organizations and event producers asking about booking. 4 were from schools, actual schools, the kind the foundation existed to support, whose teachers had seen the video and written with a kind of urgent, genuine feeling that was difficult to categorize as anything other than moved. 1 was from a cultural affairs office at a major university. 2 were from record labels. 1, subject line blank, was from the Metropolitan Opera. Carol read it twice, set down her coffee, and called James Whitmore III. He picked up on the second ring. "I've seen them," he said before she could speak. "What do you want to do?" A pause. Outside the foundation's windows, Midtown Manhattan was doing its morning things. The particular aggressive optimism of a city beginning its business day. The noise and movement of a place that does not slow down for individual moments, even historic ones. "I want," James Whitmore said slowly, "to be very careful. This is not a marketing moment. This is a genuine cultural event that happened at our gala, and the way we respond to it will say something about who we are." Another pause. "Call Carol, call REBA's people. And call Caruso's manager. We should speak before anyone does anything public." "REBA's assistant already reached out this morning," Michelle said from across the room. Carol relayed this. "Good," James said. "That's good. Set up a call for this afternoon. And Carol..." His voice shifted slightly, taking on a quality she recognized as genuine emotion, filtered through professional restraint. "Last night was something remarkable. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen a room respond like that." "I know," Carol said. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we should try to make sure it's worthy of what it was." The video had, by Thursday morning, reached 4.2 million views. This number required context to appreciate fully. The Whitmore Gala had never, in its 20-year history, generated a social media moment of any significance. The Foundation's official accounts had approximately 40,000 followers combined. The evening's most shared content in previous years had been a photograph of a particularly photogenic table centerpiece. 4.2 million views in under 12 hours was, by any reasonable measure, a different category of event entirely. The comments were an unusual cross-section of the internet's population. Classical music audiences, who had followed Giovanni Caruso across decades and continents, wrote with the specific vocabulary of people for whom opera was not entertainment but identity. Observations about phrasing, breath control, the particular quality of the room's acoustic, the way the duet's dynamics evolved across its 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Country music audiences wrote differently, with the directness and emotional immediacy of a fan base accustomed to music that says exactly what it means, expressing something closer to pride than surprise, a "this is who she is" quality that suggested they had never doubted it. And then there were the people in neither category, the general public, the casual viewers who had been sent the video by a friend or an algorithm, whose comments tended toward a simpler register. "I didn't expect to cry this morning. I watched it 7 times. Why am I emotional about this?" Kevin Marsh sat in his apartment in Brooklyn, reading the comments on his video between fielding calls from his editor, 2 competing publications, and a podcast he had never heard of. He had filed stories that went moderately viral before. He had not filed a story that went like this. He was trying to determine what exactly he had captured, what the thing itself was, beneath the numbers and the engagement metrics and the cultural conversation building around it. He pulled up the video again and watched it from the beginning. The shaky frame, the distorted high frequencies. 2 people on a stage singing something that was not supposed to happen, in a room full of people who had not expected to be where they were. He watched it 3 times. Then he opened a new document and started writing something that was not a follow-up news story, but something closer to an essay. Something that tried to account for why 4 million people had stopped their morning and watched 12 minutes of audio recorded on a phone at a charity gala. He wrote for 2 hours, he deleted most of it, he started again. What he kept coming back to, the thing that refused to be neatly argued or explained away, was something about the gap between what we expect from people and what they actually are. About the specific pleasure, and it was a pleasure, he kept using that word, of being wrong about someone in the best possible direction. REBA was in a breakfast meeting at her hotel at 8 a.m. with Donna, her Nashville-based manager Curtis Webb, and a publicist named Janet Fielding, who had been doing crisis and opportunity management for major artists for 22 years, and who had flown to New York on the first available flight that morning. "It's not a crisis," Janet said immediately, before anyone else could set the tone. "I want to be clear about that. This is entirely positive. But the volume and speed of it means we need to be deliberate about what happens next." Curtis had a printed summary on the table in front of him. He was a man who preferred paper to screens in important conversations, a habit he'd developed over 30 years in the music industry. "The video is at 4.8 million as of 30 minutes ago, he said. "It's been picked up by CNN, NBC, and 3 international outlets. There are offers," he turned a page, "from a record label wanting to discuss a classical crossover project, 2 major venues requesting availability for a potential joint concert, and—" He paused. "The Metropolitan Opera." The table was quiet. "What does the Met want?" REBA asked. "Their artistic director wants a conversation," Janet said. "Not a commitment, just a conversation." REBA poured herself more coffee. "Here's my concern," Curtis said, leaning forward. "This moment was extraordinary precisely because it was unplanned. The worst thing we can do is immediately commercialize it in a way that makes it look like it was a publicity stunt. The authenticity of what happened last night is the entire reason people are responding the way they are." "I agree," REBA said. "So we slow down," Janet said. "We respond warmly but non-committally to everything. We let the moment breathe. We don't announce anything. We don't schedule anything. We don't give interviews specifically about this for at least a week." "What about Giovanni?" Donna asked. "His people reached out this morning. His manager wants to connect." Everyone looked at REBA. She was holding her coffee cup, looking at the table in front of her in the way she sometimes looked at things. Not unfocused, but turned inward, processing something at a level that was not quite conversation. "Set up a call," she said. "Not today, tomorrow." Robert Ashfield was 60 years old, had managed Giovanni Caruso for 23 years, and had a professional style that combined meticulous precision with a particular brand of Italian-accented directness that had been refined over 2 decades of dealing with European arts institutions, American record labels, international press, and the specific, rarefied complications of managing a man who was simultaneously a global cultural icon and, in private, an often difficult and entirely human person. He arrived at Giovanni's hotel suite at 9 a.m. to find the tenor at the window in a dark wool sweater, the coffee untouched on the table beside him, looking at the city. "You haven't slept," Robert said. "I slept." "How much?" "Enough." Giovanni turned from the window. "What's the situation?" Robert sat down, opened his tablet and walked him through it. The video numbers, the press coverage, the incoming offers and requests. He did this methodically, without editorializing. The way he had learned over 23 years was the most effective approach, with a man who responded to information better than to opinion. Giovanni listened without interrupting. "The Met," Robert said, reaching the end of his summary, "wants to discuss a collaboration, joint concert potentially. They have a date in the fall program that could accommodate—" "I know what the Met wants," Giovanni said. "They've wanted a crossover event for 3 years. I said no. You said no because the proposed partner was a pop artist, and the framing was wrong. Robert paused carefully. This is a different situation. Giovanni was quiet. Her people want to connect tomorrow, Robert continued. I'd recommend you take that call. Giovanni walked to the table and picked up his coffee, which was cold by now. He drank it anyway, with the indifference to comfort of someone whose mind was elsewhere. What I am trying to determine, he said, is whether what happened last night was a coincidence or a capacity. A coincidence means it was a particular alignment of factors that produced an exceptional result and likely cannot be reproduced. A capacity means, he paused, means something else entirely. Robert said nothing. He had learned over 23 years the specific value of silence in these moments. I need to hear her again, Giovanni said. Then take the call, Robert said. By Thursday afternoon, the story had moved beyond entertainment news into something that cultural commentators found harder to categorize. It was no longer simply a story about a surprising performance. It had become a Rorschach test for attitudes about musical hierarchy, artistic legitimacy, class, and the persistent, unspoken segregation of musical genres into tiers of cultural value. A music professor at a major conservatory published a short, pointed essay arguing that the public's reaction to the video revealed the unconscious prejudices people carried about what classical music was and who it was for. The surprise implicit in the response, he argued, was itself the story. If people were shocked that a country artist could sing opera convincingly, what did that say about the assumptions embedded in their shock? A country music blogger in Nashville wrote a response that was angrier and more direct. The only people who should be shocked that REBA MCENTIRE can sing anything are people who have never listened to REBA MCENTIRE. Both pieces were widely shared. Both pieces, by different routes, arrived at something true. In his office at the foundation, James Whitmore III read both pieces carefully, leaned back in his chair, and allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The Foundation's mission was arts education, the democratization of access to music, the argument that music of all kinds belonged to all people. What had happened in his ballroom the previous evening, in ways he could not have planned and would not have dared to engineer, had illustrated that argument more powerfully than any program he had ever funded. He picked up the phone and called Janet Fielding. I have an idea, he said, and I want to know if it's too soon to suggest it. It was, in the considered opinion of everyone involved, too soon. But the idea, a joint benefit concert, REBA and Giovanni, proceeds to the Whitmore Foundation's school programs, went into the file of things that might eventually become real, to be returned to when the moment was appropriate. In the meantime, the city moved forward, as cities do. The call between REBA and Giovanni happened on Friday afternoon. REBA was in her hotel room, seated at the small desk by the window. She had changed her flight twice and was now not leaving until Sunday, though she had not entirely examined why. Donna had set up the call with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything, and then discreetly removed herself from the room, which REBA appreciated. Giovanni was in his car, somewhere on the east side, being driven to an afternoon rehearsal that he had not cancelled despite the week's developments. His voice came through the phone with the slightly compressed quality of car audio, but the resonance was still there. That particular density of sound that seemed to exist in his voice, even in casual speech, even on a phone, even in the middle of traffic. Thank you for making time, he said. Of course, she said. There was a brief, not uncomfortable pause. I've been thinking, Giovanni began, and then stopped himself, which was unusual. He was not a man who began sentences he didn't finish. I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer directly because I suspect you're capable of it. Go ahead, REBA said. When I made that comment at dinner, The invitation, the La Traviata remark. Were you angry? She considered this with genuine care. No, she said. Not angry. But you understood what was underneath it. I understood what you expected when you said it, she said, which was that I'd smile and deflect, and you'd have made your point without ever having to commit to it. A pause. The sound of the city through his car window. Yes, he said. That's accurate. Then you got more than you bargained for, she said, and there was no edge in it, just the simple, clean statement of a fact. Yes, he said again. Then, I owe you an apology for the initial assumption. You don't need to. I do, he said. I have... Another pause, longer. I have spent a long time in an environment that values certain kinds of excellence over others, and that hierarchy becomes a habit of mind if you're not careful. I was not careful. He paused once more. I'm sorry. Reba was quiet for a moment. Outside her hotel window, the city moved in its permanent, indifferent way. Apology accepted, she said simply. Then, what do you want to do with what happened? This was the real question, and they both knew it. The world was asking it from the outside. The labels, the venues, the journalists, the 4.8 million people who had watched the video. But the question between them was different. It was the interior version. Not what can be made of this, but what is this actually, and what do we want it to be? Giovanni told her about the Met's interest. She told him about Curtis's concern that moving quickly would undermine the authenticity of the original moment. He agreed, which surprised her slightly, given that she had half expected professional ambition to override his finer instincts. The worst thing, he said, would be to produce something that sounds like an attempt to recreate Wednesday night. It cannot be recreated. What it can do is point towards something new. What kind of something new, she asked. He took his time answering. In the background, his car had stopped. Traffic, presumably. I don't know yet, he said, but I think it starts with us actually working together, not for any product. Not for any audience, just working, finding out what's actually there. He paused. If you're interested. She looked out the window at the city. She had been performing for 40 years. She had sold out arenas. She had won awards that sat on shelves in her house in Nashville and meant something, and also, over time, stopped meaning as much as the individual nights that had produced them. She had continued, as artists do, because the alternative, stopping, was not something she could genuinely imagine, but also because there were still mornings when she heard a piece of music that made her feel like she hadn't yet figured everything out, hadn't yet reached the bottom of what music could do. Wednesday night in that rehearsal room had been one of those mornings, one of those moments. Yes, she said, I'm interested. Curtis Webb did not love this development, which he expressed with the particular diplomatic caution of a man who has learned over 3 decades that artists are going to do what they're going to do, and his job is to ensure they do it in a way that protects their long-term interests. I support it in principle, he told Reba during their Friday evening meeting, but I want to be clear about what working together means practically before anyone commits to anything. What's the structure? What's the timeline? Who owns what comes out of it? These are questions that need answers before... Curtis, Reba said. He stopped. I'm not asking for your blessing on a business deal, she said, not unkindly. I'm telling you that I'm going to spend some time working with a musician I think is extraordinary, and we're going to see what happens. The business questions can wait until there's something to make business decisions about. Curtis looked at her. All right, he said, but I'm talking to Ashfield. Fine. And if the Met comes back? Curtis. Fine, he said. What followed, over the next 3 weeks, was something that resisted easy description because it was genuinely without precedent. or at least without easy precedent in the careers of either artist involved. They worked in a studio on the Upper West Side that Giovanni had used for private rehearsals for years, a proper recording space, well-equipped, staffed with engineers who understood the meaning of discretion. They were there 4 days over the course of those 3 weeks, each session running 4 to 6 hours, with Roy Tanner on piano for most of them, and 2 other musicians brought in for specific purposes. They were not recording an album. They were not preparing for a concert. They were, in the specific and somewhat unusual sense of the word, exploring, moving through pieces from different traditions, different languages, different centuries, testing combinations, listening for what worked, abandoning what didn't, occasionally finding something that made everyone in the room go quiet. It was not always comfortable. Giovanni's standards were exacting in ways that occasionally surprised Reba, not because she had low standards, but because her standards operated in a different technical vocabulary, and the translation between those vocabularies was sometimes friction-producing. There was a session on the second day where they disagreed, substantially and specifically, about the phrasing of a piece they were attempting. A disagreement that was entirely musical and entirely genuine, and that resulted in 40 minutes of circular argument before Roy Tanner, quietly and without drawing attention to himself, played the phrase in question both ways on the piano. They listened. "Yours," Giovanni said after a moment. "Mine what?" Reba said. "Your phrasing. It's the right one for this piece." She looked at him. "You sound surprised," he said. "You're not an easy man to agree with," she said. "I agree with people when they're right," he said. "The difficulty is that most people are not right as often as they believe." She started to respond to this and then stopped because she realized with some irritation that she couldn't entirely argue with it. There were other moments. A moment on the third day when they were working through an arrangement of a Stephen Foster song, American folk material, early 19th century, something that belonged to neither of their primary traditions. And Giovanni began to hear something in it that he couldn't immediately articulate, some quality of grief carried in the melody that the arrangement wasn't fully expressing, and he stopped the session and said so, and Reba listened. And then she sang a phrase of it without accompaniment, just her voice in the room, with a particular quality of feeling that she hadn't put there consciously, but that came from somewhere real. And Giovanni was very quiet for a moment, and then he said softly, "There it is." And Roy Tanner, at the piano, wrote down a note on his own sheet music that he would later describe, when asked, as "the moment I understood what they were actually doing." The world, meanwhile, continued to process Wednesday night in its own ways. The video's view count had stabilized at around 7 million, still climbing, but more slowly, the organic plateau of genuine cultural impact rather than the artificial spike of a managed publicity moment. Articles continued to be written, takes continued to be taken, opinions continued to be formulated and shared and argued about. Frank DeLuca, the Connecticut real estate developer who had cried at the bar, was not a man given to following cultural conversations. But he found himself returning to the video in the mornings before his workday began, watching it in the quiet of his kitchen before his household came alive around him. He couldn't fully explain why. He was 60 years old, had built a successful business from nothing, had attended 17 charity galas because they were part of the social infrastructure of his professional world, and had never before in his adult life been moved to tears by live music. His wife, Diane, noticed this habit within the first week. She said nothing about it for several days, and then one morning she sat down across from him at the kitchen table while he was watching it and watched it with him. And when it ended, she said, "What is it exactly? What moves you about it?" He thought about this seriously, which was unusual for him. He was a man who acted rather than reflected, who solved problems rather than examined feelings. But he thought about this. "I think," he said finally, "it's that they surprised each other. Not just the audience, they surprised each other." Diane watched him for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. "Maybe you should give more to the arts programs," she said. He laughed. "I was already thinking that." He called James Whitmore III that afternoon and made a donation that was 3 times his previous annual gift. In Giovanni's Midtown hotel suite, he had extended his stay in New York, which Robert Ashfield had managed without comment. There were evenings after the studio sessions when Giovanni sat by the window with his wine and engaged in a kind of internal accounting that he had not performed in some time. He was 61 years old. He had sung at the world's greatest opera houses. He had performed the canonical tenor roles with the world's finest orchestras and conductors. He had a career of almost incomprehensible achievement, measured by any standard the classical music world recognized. He was also a man whose marriage had been quietly disintegrating for 4 years. His wife, Elena, lived primarily in their home in Rome. They spoke by phone 2 or 3 times a week, with the careful courtesy of 2 people who still cared for each other and no longer knew how to bridge the distance that had grown between them. Not the geographic distance, which was manageable, but the interior distance, the quiet divergence of 2 people who had been moving in different directions for longer than either had initially acknowledged. He had not discussed this with anyone. He was a private man in the specific way that very public people sometimes are. The more the world knew about his professional self, the more aggressively he protected what was personal. But in the evenings by the window in New York, he found himself thinking about Elena with the particular quality of thought that comes when something in the present illuminates something that has been visible but unexamined. The studio sessions, the experience of genuine creative collaboration, of being surprised by someone, of finding that surprise generative rather than threatening, had somehow made the absence of that quality in his marriage more visible. He was not, he recognized, a man who had been easy to be married to. He picked up his phone and called Elena. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice had the slightly formal warmth of someone who was glad to hear from him and was also protecting themselves against the disappointment of a short call. "I've been thinking," he said, which was not how he usually began phone calls. A pause. "About what?" she asked carefully. "About the fact that I have spent 23 years on stages," he said, "and not enough time on other things, more important things." He paused. "I think I'd like to come home after New York." Another pause, longer. "How long is after New York?" she asked. "A month," he said. "Maybe more." She was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said softly. And then, "Are you well, Giovanni?" "I'm—" He paused, looking out the window at the city. "I'm better than I have been in some time. I'm not sure I can explain why." "You don't have to explain," she said. He stayed on the phone with her for 1 hour and 40 minutes. It was the longest personal call he had made in years. 6 weeks after the gala, on a Tuesday evening in late November, the Whitmore Foundation announced a joint benefit concert to be held the following April at Carnegie Hall. The performers would be REBA MCENTIRE and Giovanni Caruso. The program would include selections from the classical repertoire, from American folk and country traditions, and from a new collection of arrangements they had been developing together. All proceeds would go to the Foundation's arts education programs. The announcement generated, within 48 hours, more press coverage than any single event announcement the Foundation had ever made. It also sold out in 11 minutes. James Whitmore III called Carol Prescott when the sellout notification arrived. 11 minutes, he said. "I know," she said. "I was watching." "Do you want to know something?" he said. There was a quality to his voice she had not heard in 20 years, not the professional warmth he deployed with precision, but something underneath it, something that arrived unguarded. I've been doing this work for 20 years. 20 years of galas and programs and fundraising campaigns and grant applications, and I have believed in all that time that arts education mattered. Genuinely believed it, not just as a mission statement, but as something true. But belief and evidence are different things. And now you have evidence, Carol said. I have 7 million people who stopped what they were doing to watch 12 minutes of music recorded on a phone, he said. That's not a marketing metric. That's people telling you something about what they need. He paused. That's evidence. The weeks between the announcement and the concert were, for those closest to the story, a period of quiet consolidation. The world adjusting itself around a new fact, the way landscapes adjust around a new structure that has been built in their midst. Kevin Marsh published his essay. It ran in a Sunday magazine supplement and was 3,200 words, which was longer than anything he had published in years. It was not a news story. It was something harder to categorize, a piece of cultural observation, an argument about music and class and expectation and the specific human pleasure of being wrong about someone in the best possible direction. His editor had pushed back on the length. Kevin had held firm in the way he rarely held firm, because he knew, with a clarity unusual in his professional experience, that every word was necessary. It was the most read piece the magazine had published in 4 years. He received an email from a reader in rural Kentucky who wrote, "I don't read music journalism. I'm a farmer. My daughter showed me your piece. I cried. I'm not sure exactly why. I think it's because you said something I've known my whole life but never seen written down, that the music you grow up with is real music. Thank you." Kevin kept the email. He read it sometimes when he was struggling with a piece and needed to remember why the work mattered. Janet Fielding, who had managed the public response to the gala event and the subsequent announcement with considerable skill, had a late afternoon call with Curtis Webb in early December, during which they compared notes with the professional candor of two people who had been managing extraordinary people for long enough to speak plainly with each other. "How is she?" Curtis asked. Janet considered the question carefully. "Energized," she said finally, "in a way I haven't seen in a while." A pause. "The work with Caruso is doing something for her creatively that I think she needed without knowing she needed it." Curtis was quiet for a moment. "And Caruso?" "His manager says something similar," Janet said, though with considerably more continental reserve. Curtis laughed, a short, genuine sound. "Are we worried about anything?" he asked. "About what, specifically?" "About the concert. About whether it can deliver what the video promised." Janet thought about this honestly. "No," she said, "because the video didn't make a promise. It documented something real. And what's been happening in that studio over the past several weeks is also real. You can feel it when you walk into the room. And I've been in a lot of studios, Curtis, in a lot of rooms, with a lot of artists who were supposed to be doing something important." She paused. "This is different." "Different how?" "They're making something that neither of them could make alone," she said. "That's different. Roy Tanner did not tell people in general what he did for work. He was 28, played piano at events and sessions, had a small teaching practice on the side, and lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights that he was slowly making into a real home. He was a private person with a rich interior life and a professional humility that kept him, by his own design, mostly in the background," he told his mother. He called her on a Sunday evening in mid-November, 2 weeks after the gala, and told her the whole story. The hotel rehearsal room with 40 minutes notice, the run-throughs with the upright piano, the moment in the ballroom when the room went silent. His mother listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she said, "Were you scared?" "Before we went on," he said, "a little." "And during?" He thought about this. "No," he said. I was just inside the music. That's the only way I know how to describe it." His mother was quiet for a moment. "That's what it's supposed to feel like," she said. She was a retired piano teacher who had given lessons for 35 years in a suburb of Philadelphia. She had taught Roy from the age of 6. She had sat in his first recitals and his high school concerts and his Juilliard auditions, and never once, in all those years, stopped watching him with the specific attention of someone who understood that what he did mattered. "That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like, and not everyone gets to feel it." "I know," Roy said. "Hold on to it," she said. He did. The April concert at Carnegie Hall was a Tuesday evening in a city fully awake to spring, the kind of April night that New York occasionally produces as if to apologize for its winters, clear and cool, with a quality of light in the late afternoon that made the buildings along 57th Street look briefly like something from a painting. The house was full, or a country music audience, but both intermingled, dressed in the full range from formal attire to what one of the ushers charitably described as enthusiastic casual, seated together in the red velvet chairs of the hall with the slightly tentative camaraderie of people who have arrived at the same destination from different directions. It had been full since 11 minutes after the tickets went on sale, and the particular composition of the audience that assembled that evening was notable in ways that the ushers and house managers would discuss afterward. It was not a classical music audience. Frank DeLuca was in the 4th row. He had purchased 2 tickets the morning they went on sale before his assistant arrived, sitting at his kitchen computer at 7:59 a.m. with a level of focused intent that he usually reserved for acquisition negotiations. Diane was beside him. She had not been to Carnegie Hall in 15 years. She was wearing a blue dress that he hadn't seen in several years and had told her that evening looked beautiful, which was true, and also the kind of thing he was making more of an effort to say. Senator Holt was in the 8th row, without her press secretary, without her aide, attending as a private citizen in the specific and somewhat radical way that public figures occasionally choose to do something for themselves. She had a program in her lap. She read it carefully before the lights went down, the way she read things, thoroughly, taking in the notes about the arrangements, the descriptions of each piece, the brief biographical notes about the musicians involved. Carol Prescott was in the wings. She had been in the wings for more events than she could count, managing the machinery of evenings that other people experienced as magical from the front. She had stood in the wings of the Grand Meridian Ballroom 6 weeks ago and felt something that she had not fully articulated even to herself, a kind of recognition, an understanding that something real had happened in a space she had organized and a program she had managed, something that went beyond the sum of its logistical parts. She was in the wings again tonight. She preferred it. From here, she could see both the stage and the house, the full picture, the way it actually looked when it was real. The program ran for 2 hours and 20 minutes, with a 20-minute intermission. It opened with Giovanni alone, 3 songs from the classical Italian repertoire, his voice in Carnegie Hall doing what it had done in every great hall it had inhabited for 40 years, claiming the room, establishing the terms, reminding everyone present what they were in the presence of. Then Reba alone, 4 songs from her country catalogue, rearranged for a small ensemble that included strings and a single guitar, stripped of the production that sometimes surrounded them in their original recordings. Stripped, they revealed themselves fully, not entertainment products, but songs. Actual songs, built on actual feeling, about actual human things, love and loss and persistence and the specific texture of American life in all its complicated beauty. The applause between sets was the warm, full applause of an audience that was already happy, already rewarded, already getting more than they'd come expecting. And then they were both on stage together, They had prepared 6 pieces for the collaborative section of the program. They performed 8. The extra 2 emerged the way the best things in live music emerge. Not from planning, but from the specific chemistry of a room responding to what's happening on the stage, feeding something back to the performers that the performers then return, amplified in a loop that builds until the room and the stage are one single resonating system. The Libiamo was the 4th piece. When Roy Tanner played the opening bars, the recognition that rippled through the house from those who had watched the video, those who had read about the gala, those who understood what this moment was the continuation of, produced a sound that was half applause and half something else, something closer to collective breath. They sang it the way they had sung it that night in the ballroom, to each other genuinely, with the quality of 2 people listening as much as performing. But it was different now too. 6 weeks of work were in it. 6 weeks of discovering what was actually there, of arguing about phrasing and finding the right answer and building something that neither of them had built before. The voice that Giovanni heard responding to him was the same voice it had always been, unclassifiable, extraordinary, built from a tradition entirely different from his own. But now it was also familiar. Now it was a voice he knew. And for Reba, singing beside him in Carnegie Hall, the voice that answered her was not the polite, vaguely condescending voice of a man making a dinner table joke at her expense. It was the voice of someone who had looked at what she was capable of and revised his entire understanding, and then, the harder thing, the thing that required actual character, said so. The phrase that had silenced the ballroom 6 weeks ago silenced Carnegie Hall. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5. The hall stayed silent for 1 full additional second after the piece ended, a collective, unconscious tribute, before the applause broke over the stage like something physical. Backstage afterward, in the controlled, warm chaos of a successful concert's aftermath, the congratulations, the flowers, the members of the Foundation's board moving through with expressions of contained exhilaration, Giovanni found a brief moment of relative quiet near the back corridor. Robert Ashfield appeared at his elbow. "Remarkable," he said, which from Robert was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Yes," Giovanni agreed. "The calls tomorrow will be—" "Tomorrow," Giovanni said. "Tonight, let's just—" He gestured at the corridor, at the sounds of the room, at the specific and irreproducible fact of the evening. "Let's just let tonight be tonight." Robert nodded. "All right." A moment later, Donna appeared with the information that Reba was wrapped in her conversation with the Foundation board, but wanted to find a moment before the evening ended. They found it 20 minutes later, in a corner of the reception room, while the rest of the world moved around them with champagne and conversation and the residual energy of something that had gone well. She had changed from the dress she'd performed in into something simpler, and her red hair was slightly softer than it had been on stage. She looked, Giovanni thought, exactly like herself, which was a strange thought to have, and which he recognized as its own kind of observation about the last 6 weeks, the way certain collaborations have a way of making you see people more clearly. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. 8 pieces, she said. "The room wanted 8 pieces," he said simply. "It would have been impolite to refuse." She laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that arrives when something genuinely strikes you as funny and you don't bother managing its expression. He smiled. Not the smile from the dinner table, not the calibrated social instrument, the other one, the one that had appeared briefly in the rehearsal room 6 weeks ago and had shown up more frequently in the studio sessions, the one that was simply a smile. "I have something to say to you," he said. "And I would like to say it without a lot of surrounding language, if that's all right." "Go ahead," she said. "What you did 6 weeks ago, accepting that ridiculous challenge, was an act of courage." He paused. "I've been on stages for 40 years. I know what courage looks like in a performer. I had underestimated you, which was my error, and you corrected it without making me feel the correction was the point. That's a kind of generosity that I don't think I would have managed in your position." He paused again. "I am a better musician for this 6 weeks. I'm possibly a somewhat better person. Both of those things are because of you, and I wanted you to know that." Reba looked at him for a moment in the warm noise of the reception room, the celebration moving around them, Carnegie Hall above them, still holding the echo of 8 pieces and 2 hours and 20 minutes, and one extraordinary silence. "You know," she said, "for a man who talks too much, you occasionally say exactly the right thing." He raised his champagne glass slightly, the same gesture from across the ballroom 6 weeks ago, but different now, carrying different weight, meaning something it hadn't meant then. She raised hers. They drank. Outside on 57th Street, the April night was doing what it had promised, cool and clear, the city running in its permanent current around the people flowing out of Carnegie Hall. A woman in a formal coat stopped on the sidewalk, looked up at the building for a moment, and then pulled out her phone and called her daughter. "You need to get tickets for this when they announce the next one," she said when her daughter answered. "I don't care what it costs, just trust me." Across the street, a man who had come alone, who had watched the video 47 times in the week since the gala, and had bought a single ticket the morning they went on sale, and had sat in the 32nd row and had not moved for 2 hours and 20 minutes, stood on the sidewalk for a while before getting his phone out to call a car. He stood there not because he needed to, but because he wasn't quite ready yet, because some evenings, some pieces of music, some combinations of things you didn't expect, required a moment of stillness before you could return to the regular speed of the world. He stood there until he was ready. Then he called his car, and the city carried him home, and Carnegie Hall stood in the April night, as it had stood for 130 years, holding in its walls the sum of everything that had ever been performed inside it. All the evenings, all the artists, all the music, all the moments that happened once, and were gone and left a mark that didn't leave. One more evening now in that count, one more thing that had been real.